Hello everyone, I'm going to show you an incredible chess game featuring two fantastic checkmates. But why do I say two checkmates? Intriguing, isn't it? Well, you'll see. In this game, the player with the white pieces plays e4 and his opponent responds with e5. So who are the protagonists of this game? The player with the white pieces, I don't know him. I don't have much information about him. But the player with the black pieces is named Quenehen. And him? He was twice British champion in 1924 and 1925 when he was only 16 and 17 years old. But afterwards, he didn't continue with professional chess. He had another job. And then World War II also happened. White continues with knight to f3, knight to c6, and the move bishop to c4. We're in an Italian opening. After bishop to c5, white plays c3, which is natural. It's to prepare the push of d4. And here the main move is knight to f6. But Quenehen, with the black pieces, chooses instead to play queen to e7. Queen to e7 still makes sense. It's to prevent the d4 push. Because in that case, black could capture. And if white recaptures, black could take the pawn on d4 while giving check to the white king. That's why white doesn't play d4 but instead goes for kingside castling. Black plays d6. Now d4 is played. The bishop retreats to b6 and the pawn to b4. White starts to take space on the queen side. They want to go on the attack and suffocate black's pieces. The bishop on b6 and the knight on c6 with the pawns on a4, a5 and b5. Black plays bishop to g4. Note that black cannot win the pawn by playing pawn takes and knight takes b4 because the knight would be undefended and the king is exposed on the diagonal. So that allows for queen to a4 check. And even if the knight returns to c6, the push to d5 will pin the knight and you win a piece. So as I told you, bishop, g4 is played. White plays a4, preparing a5, so black plays a5 preemptively. b5, chasing the knight, which moves to d8, and the bishop settles on a3, facing the black queen. Black plays f6 to reinforce the pawn on e5. White plays rook to a2, knight to e6, and they decide to capture on e5. Now obviously black can't recapture with the d-pawn because they would lose the queen, so it's the f-pawn that takes on e5. And now the player with the white pieces plays queen to d5. This puts pressure on the knight, but more importantly attacks the b7 pawn, and then the rook. But this queen move no longer protects the knight. So Quenehen captures the knight on f3, hoping to cause some damage to white's kingside castle. White takes on b7, attacking the rook. And will Quenehen move his rook? Well, no. He plays queen to g5. He's preparing mate on g2. So queen takes rook, check, king to e7. So where do we stand in terms of material count? White has won a rook and a pawn and has only lost a knight. On top of that, they've forced the black king out of castling, but they still have to deal with this mating threat. So here, they're forced to play the pawn to g3. The knight comes to f4, intensifying the attack against the white king. The g3 pawn is pinned, and of course black is threatening knight to h3, checkmate, with the knight attacking and the bishop trapping the king. That's why white will play rook to e1. They're going to free up the f1 square. So after knight to h3 check, the king will be able to move. But black is going to play queen to h5. So of course you can't take the knight because of queen to g4 check, followed by queen to g2 mate. But what does queen to h5 threaten? Maybe entering on h3, but moving the rook to e1 has freed up the f1 square, which allows the bishop to come back to attack the queen and defend the square, g2. So it seems that black doesn't really have a threat. And yet it's not easy to find the best move for white. So I invite you to pause the video. What would you play as white in this position? We'll discuss it afterwards. So, what did you think of? In the game, the player with white played the natural move, knight to d2. The knight wasn't doing anything, so it develops and attacks the bishop. By leaving the queen on a8, it pins the black knight since the rook is undefended. And yet this move is a mistake. Here the moment is critical. In reality, black has a very strong threat here, a very strong attack that white is not going to notice. So before I show you how the attack will continue after knight to d2, I'm going to show you the right move for white, What should have been played in this position if you still want to hope to win as white? You had to play bishop takes e6 check, with a double idea. If the king takes, then the king will get checkmated. There will be rook to d2 check. If the king goes back to e7, the queen comes to d8. Checkmate. The rook protects the queen. The queen controls the diagonal. The bishop controls the other diagonal. And of course, the queen controls the horizontal squares. And after rook to d2, if the bishop interposes, you could already win the bishop, but there's something even better. Queen to d8, check. Forcing king to c5, and queen takes c7. Checkmate, once again. With the queen attacking the king, defending the bishop, and the pawn controlling the escape square. It's a real checkmate. So, after bishop takes d6 check, we understood that the king couldn't take. And if the pawn takes, then queen to b7 check, the king has to move, and then we take the bishop. And this position is better than the one where white is about to play, knight to d2. Because in this position, white will eliminate the bishop, remove a piece from the attack, and keep some attacking potential against the black king, who is less well protected. So in this position, bishop takes d6 was the right move, but knight to d2 was played. So how can black continue their attack here? Do you have an idea? I invite you once again to pause the video. Well, the right move here is knight to f6. We create a direct line between the rook and the queen, so we're threatening to capture the queen. But above all, the knight is about to spring into action. So now, bishop takes d6, that doesn't work at all. After bishop takes d6 check, then we take with the b7 pawn check. The knight can come back to defend the bishop. So white has taken the rook. They've won both rooks. And how are black going to punish white? Well, not by playing knight to g4, because then there would be queen to g7 check. So then, how can black win? What move should they play if it's not the knight? This is the third time in this video that I'm going to ask you to look for the decisive move, and this time, mate is going to be very close. So, what did you come up with? Here, the right move, after sacrificing both rooks, is to sacrifice the queen. You force the king to take. If the king goes to f1, then you can play queen to g2, checkmate, or bishop to g2, checkmate, or even queen to h1, checkmate. There are a lot of possible mates, so the king will take. And knight to g4, check. The king is forced to go to g1. And now there are two ways to checkmate. That's why I told you there are two spectacular mates in this game. You can play knight to h3, check, forcing king to f1. And now checkmate with knight to h2. But you can deliver an even more beautiful mate. Bishop takes f2, check, protected by the knight, forces king to f1, and bishop to g2 is mate. A very, very rare checkmate with both bishops attacking the king, protected by the two knights. Even though black has sacrificed all their heavy pieces, both rooks and the queen. And look at the position, black has only captured a knight. White still has their queen, both rooks, both bishops, and a knight. What an extraordinary position. So what do you think of Quennehen's play in this game? Of course, there are still some mistakes, since white could have played bishop takes d6 check. But it's still quite a creative game, especially for that time period. So what do you think? Feel free to leave me comments, share the video, support the channel, and give it a thumbs up. And we'll meet again soon for new adventures. Goodbye, everyone.